Now, there is a bit of boomer bashing on the podcast, and just to assure
Hashtag not all.
our audience, hashtag not all boomers. There are plenty of good boomers out there.
Some, I assume, are good people.
Yeah, some I assume are good people. I know that there's some boomers watching right now, and we thank you for your support and your continued love. We love you too. But as a generation, boomers have a particular reputation, which sadly they keep living up to. Because their reputation is that of the hedonists who never learned to take responsibility, passed over all responsibilities, and handed what was in many cases, beautiful, well-kept, historic nations of the past, handed them over as desiccated husks.
We are all Nicholas 30-ons, essentially.
Yes, we are, but I'm hoping the cruises are worth it. And this article came out from The Economist that I thought we'd just like to take a quick look at, called Why People Over the Age of 55 Are the New Problem Generation. Now, this will also include a number of older Gen Xers. So, Gen X, you're not off the hook either, you lazy bastards.
You said that like Hulk Hogan.
Did I really?
I'm coming through you, brother. I'm going to give you that strapation, brother. Anyway.
Look up Hulk Hogan's strapation promos. There's something to behold. Anyway, so this article is talking about these particular generational trends that this cohort of over 55s have developed into. And it starts off by talking about a retirement community. And they say that, normally you think of a retirement community and you think to yourself it's going to be easy chairs, overcooked food, endless daytime TV. Not really the case anymore, because this is Latitude Margaritaville, a community being built near Hilton Head Island in Southern California. South Carolina, which is hosting toga parties, was a live band. It was a riot. Barbie, another of the community's ambassadors, which is a resident employed by the developers to sell it to potential newcomers, compares living there to starting college all over again. There are, she says, drinks on the driveway, cocktails on the concrete.
I feel like this might be a slightly skewed sample size. However, I will say, and
this is what it's starting off with. Don't worry, it will go on to give some more broad stats.
Have you noticed? So I've given up drinking in the last year. I know, but there's lots of. Given the news stories, I don't blame you. Sometimes I wish I did. There's a large cohort of our generation who do not drink. I've noticed that sort of our parents' generation, and especially our grandparents' generation, drink habitually during the week in the evenings. It's a sort of like wine o'clock meme of women in their 40s and 50s.
I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing. I mean, being the lonely cat lady with a wine addiction, that's its own thing. I think enjoying a glass here and there throughout the week can actually be beneficial for your health.
But not a glass here and there throughout the week. They will drink habitually in the evenings.
If you're having a bottle of wine every single night, and yeah. I've known middle-aged women to do that.
Yes, we know lots of people. So there is something about. There's a kind of latent hedonism baked into this generation. And I think it's partially because generations are a very 20th century product. Like, we normally define splits by wars or epochal events, but generations in the 20th century were defined by technological innovations and then the adaptation to technological innovations. Like, the boomer generation are defined by the birth control pill that ended up liberating women to go...
And easy credit.
And work on parity with men. It enabled abortion, and so this meant that the modus operandi of the generation was individual autonomy and consumption. And so this is why lots of them still feel entitled to pension systems that they were promised would pay off at the end of their working lives, that they themselves haven't paid into, and they imported infinity immigrants in order to keep propping up the pyramid scheme. So this entitlement mentality and this consumption mentality are intimately linked because of the technologies which came to define the boomer generation.
Yes, and there's a lot of talk in this on the generational differences, particularly young people now maybe going between the ages of 18 to 35 in particular. And on the talk of, these people who are basically high-functioning alcoholics indulging every single night of the week versus the younger generations who abstain from that altogether. Personally, I'm going to say there's some hilarity and some sadness in both of these, because I think that there is a golden mean that you can actually take things in moderation. Not that I would ever advocate some of the things that these old people are doing, but you can have things in moderation without abstaining from them completely and still live a good and responsible life. So it's a shame to me that it seems that the bad example that's been set by some of the older generations has put off, along with other factors like economic considerations, lack of access to the dating market, etc.
The internet itself just encouraging you to stay at home.
Access to the internet, which has meant that younger people aren't having fun as much as they should be, because really you should have some more fun in your... Don't be a complete degenerate. Don't just waste your younger years. Those are the years that you should be building up the future that you have ahead of you. But at the same time, you can take a weekend to have a bit of a drink and have some fun with mates. That's part of the fun of being alive, and dare I say, part of the glorious European tradition. We have a drinking culture in Europe for a goddamn reason. I saw recently a Harvard study that showed that Northwest Europeans actually benefit from somewhat mid-level alcohol consumption throughout a week, maybe 3 or 4 drinks per week, as opposed to a lot of other populations across the world which don't. They actually have negative effects from it. We can have positive effects, and I think that's probably due to the fact that we've just been drinking for a very long time. Same with milk.
This is basically the Catholic position of that you can take some time off to spend with family, you can indulge in small vices in moderation, but I am a massive hypocrite here, and I'm probably closer to the US because I don't drink and I work all the bloody time. So you are welcome to shame me, Harry.
I'm not going to shame you for, doing what comes naturally to you. But anyway, I'll carry on with this. So it carries on. It says, if Margaritaville's residents are representative of their age cohort, there will be a lot more to toga parties than fancy dress, whereas young people in rich countries these days are addicted to their phones, more anxious than previous generations. So it's talking about the sort of stuff that we just said. Their grandparents belong to a generation that experimented with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and as they reach older age, they're not giving up their old habits. Among those for whom time's winged... I'm not going to say that because it's just... among old people who are going to die, drug and alcohol use has surged. Since many have long since struck coyness from the statute books, sexually transmitted diseases are also spreading among the over 55s. The prevalence of gonorrhea among Americans aged 55 and up has increased by more than 6 times since 2010. Today, older adults are much more likely to participate in hookup culture of casual encounters and sex, which might be encouraged by the further encouraged by the availability of drugs for sexual dysfunction. So, boomers, we all know, en masse took the blue pill, but they're also taking other blue pills to help with this.
They've totally absconded their duty to act as village elders and custodians of the culture.
Yeah, I mean, even in the past, if you were maybe old and childless, you still had a responsibility to the local community. These guys are just, just get shit-faced and get laid, boy.
There have always been structured roles of civilizational fatherliness or motherliness for childless people. This is why the Catholic Church has priests and nuns. But this no longer understands the benefit of children or the obligation you have as a civilization if you don't have children. Instead, just defining yourself as an atomistic consumer is the best possible thing for you to have. And if you can no longer consume to your heart's content, well, euthanasia's on the way in the UK.
Well, yeah, I suppose if you've got your gonorrhea's flaring up, maybe you're not getting it like you used to. You're 70 years old. Well, Keir Starmer's got a solution for you.
Hello, Lotus is out of context.
Yeah, the commonality of living in retirement communities and the increased use of dating apps for seniors is pushing this along, according to Janie Steckenrider in a paper in the
Unfortunately named.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate one. But yeah, I have heard that in some retirement communities, man, it's gross. Similar increases are evident elsewhere, though in the 4 years to 2023, the number of new syphilis infections among young adults in England fell slightly. Cases in those over the age of 65, not 55, 65, grew by 31%.
Be an incel, it saves lives, according to The Economist.
Yeah. Thankfully, that doesn't apply to HIV, but syphilis...
No, HIV is up. HIV is massively up, but it's up because of Africans.
Oh, yeah.
It's literally the majority of new cases are from before they enter the country.
Michael Gove's looking at these lines going up, and he's going, yes,
we are
this is what we were going for. This is what the Conservatives were about.
14 years has resulted in battery farming AIDS patients.
Makes perfect sense to me. And along with those new AIDS patients, as you can imagine, a lot of old people suddenly coming down with a hasty case of syphilis doesn't do well for the health services. They say the oldest strain public services wreak havoc on national politics and blah, blah, blah. Elderly revelers are numerous. The number of people over 65 is growing across the rich world. It goes on to say why some of them are so reckless. It also says, strangely, that a lot of them are getting arrested for stupid behaviour as well. Let me see if I can find this. Because a lot of them are taking drugs. In England and Wales, deaths of people over 50 made up more than a third of all drug misuse deaths in 2022, up from just 13% 2 decades before. It says, well, some of this are old heroin addicts, but also, deaths caused by cocaine are now more numerous than in the old than among the young. No fewer than 38 people over the age of 50 died from ODing on ecstasy as well, which is mainly for, as it points out here, teenage ravers in the 4 years to 2022. What are people over 50 doing taking ecstasy?
A really lively round of bingo. So we are basically paying exponential amounts to the NHS, for which we're importing Nigerian nurses, and then also importing Albanians to be drug dealers, so that over 65 can goon and
get it on.
I have bottomless contempt.
Isn't modernity wonderful? And they carry on and say, infection and early death are only some of the more obvious problems. A minority of the reckless older causing more direct mischief themselves. They make up a growing proportion of people arrested and convicted of crimes. It's well known that America's prisons are increasingly full of older inmates. What's less well understood is that it is not entirely due to inmates aging on the inside. Older people make up a larger share of newly convicted criminals these days too. From 1992 to 2022, among men arrested, the share of those over 50 tripled from 5% to 15%, according to FBI data.
So, at the exact time when testosterone is decreasing, therefore violence would decrease, cultural factors and doubtless increasing diversity are causing that number to go up.
Yeah.
We are failing as a civilization.
Yeah, and sadly, a lot of that does have to be put down to the, as you say, complete abdication of responsibility from some of the older generations. Again, not just boomers. Being a boomer does not necessarily mean that you're old. It's a mindset. There can be young boomers, old boomers, and Gen X are falling into this as well if you're 55. I see you in the chat, engaged for you. Keep Gen X's name out of your mouth. If you can find the energy to get off your sofa and come make me, maybe. And then it points out some of these problems and the differences between the younger and the older generations. And again, I think this is where it's a little bit sadder for the younger generations who are looking at the terrible example of the older people around them and saying, I don't want that, which is fair. But at the same time, if you're young, you should be taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you, as long as you're doing it in moderation and not being an idiot ruining your life, etc. So they say, in the 2 decades to 2023, the proportion of people aged 18 to 34 in America who ever have the occasion to use alcoholic beverages declined from 72% to 62%, according to Gallup. Yet among those over 55, alcohol use increased to 59% from 49%. Similar trends are visible almost anywhere you look across the rich world. While younger Australians are drinking at less risky levels, there's been a significant increase in risky drinking by older Australians, according to the Alcohol and Drug Foundation in Australia. Now that's a different metric there, which is drinking to risky levels. So that might just be that younger Australians are not being complete idiots about it.
They haven't seen that VB Longneck Vine from back in the day, have they?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to introduce people to it. I mean, 20 to 8 in the... No, anyway. Such has been the shift that older Australians are now more likely to drink at dangerous levels than people in general. In France, alcohol consumption has dipped among all groups in recent years, but it's the young who are forsaking it the most. There has been a loss, and this is the most French thing I've ever read, of wine transmission within families. According to Bernard Farges, the head of France's wine producers industry group. Of course he's going to say something like that, but at the same time, right, again, it's part of European tradition that we like a drink. And in France in particular, it's part of the tradition that they're more open to a little bit of wine when you're younger.
It was Christ's first miracle, after all, so it is Christian.
Exactly, it makes perfect sense. And so if there's a loss of that, especially the transmission within the families, outside of just the surface level reading of, well, younger people are drinking less, this is again another indication of the breakdown of those family ties that keep people together, because the whole point of the family ties is, yes, you have the family bond, you protect one another, you look after one another, but also you transmit these shared cultural practices down the generations in a way that's very healthy and keeps people tethered to their native culture and proud of it. And so this is just another indication of the breakdown of that. And sadly, it does have to be put to the older generations who forsook their responsibility to actually take care of that.
Well, they not only didn't pass it down the civilizational chain by having higher rates of divorce, particularly with no-fault divorce in America, but it can be as simple as not eating together at meal times, therefore there's no shared familial culture. So if you just sit in front of the television and you're all watching the hypnotic box, then there's no conversation, there's no transmission of values or appreciation of heritage, and the civilizational chain breaks at the last link.
Yeah, and I think that's my main takeaway from this, which is it's just another sign that we're not as close to one another as we used to be. We're not as caring about our own traditions and culture as we used to be, and that this is all quite sad, even if the idea of nursing homes being wildfire super spreader events for STDs is on the surface quite funny. So there's some information that I got from this that I thought was relevant and interesting. I hope you got something out of it. Be careful, folks.
Thanks, Dad.
Ask, check before you dive in there, youngster.
Look both ways before you cross the street.
Yeah, there you go.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.